Thank you for joining us this evening. In 2003, a Chinese pharmacist named Han Lick developed what he thought would be a replacement for cigarettes, called an electronic cigarette. In 2007, the device was introduced into the United States. By 2011, 7 million people were vaping already in the United States. The estimates for 2021, which is the last data that we had, was 82 million people were vaping around the world. That compares to about 1.1 billion people who they estimate smoke around the world. Vaping is, as you'll hear tonight from our panel, is as destructive as smoking. And so we are very proud, in conjunction with the SAFE Foundation, to welcome our esteemed panelists. Jessica Steinmetz is Clinical Director of the SAFE Foundation. Dr. Ezra Dweck is Clinical Associate Professor of the Department of Medicine in the Division of Pulmonology, Critical Care and Sleep Medicine at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And Shlomo Lieberman is Director of Mental Health for the Mental Health Clinic here at Sephardic Corp. I look forward to hearing from you guys tonight, and with that, take it away. Shlomo.
So hello everybody and welcome for coming out. I have the easy job tonight. My job is sort of to ask the questions and keep the dialogue going between Jennifer and Dr. Dweck, Jessica and Dr. Dweck. So we're going to start right in with some of these questions, and begin at the basic level and move ourselves into the subject a little bit more. The first question, Dr. Dweck, if you can explain what vaping really is clinically, as well as the difference between vaping and traditional cigarettes.
Thanks. Sure. First of all, I just want to say it's great to be here with you guys. Thank you for inviting me. Some of the differences are maybe obvious. A cigarette, basically, most of us have probably seen one, right? You take dried tobacco leaves, you add in a bunch of chemical flavorings, you add in some other material to help keep it from drying out and to burn nicely, and wrap it up in paper. Then you light it on fire and put it in your mouth. And what you're breathing in there is a lot of particulate matter and a lot of new substances that get created by the combustion of that stuff into your lungs. Vaping, on the other hand, is a little bit different. You start out with a liquid instead of the tobacco leaves. It also is going to have some chemicals in it. It's got nicotine. It's got usually some other liquid like propylene glycol. And you take that liquid and you put it into one of these electronic devices that has a battery in it and a heating element. And when you activate it, the heating element basically causes some of that liquid to boil, creating an aerosol, and then you breathe that in. So those are the basic differences in how a cigarette versus a vaping device or an e-cigarette might work.
So what are the concerns, the primary physical concerns with vaping?
So with vaping, so as was mentioned, these devices were sort of invented in 2003. They really first entered the American market in about 10 years ago. And we actually don't know the full effects of what happens when you take these chemicals in this liquid, vaporize it, and begin to inhale it. But what we do know, what we do know about it doesn't look good. So first of all, it's an incredibly potent delivery system for nicotine. A cigarette might contain 10 to 12 milligrams of nicotine. A cartridge in a Juul, for example, may contain 500 milligrams of nicotine. So it's an incredibly efficient method of getting nicotine into the body, first of all. And then you've got the other chemicals that are in there, which are undergoing some change as well when you activate the battery and start to boil it off and burn it. We know that there's heavy metals and other toxic materials in the vape liquid and in the aerosol when you breathe in. So there's a lot to be concerned about.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, how do the social and ritual aspects of vaping among adults make it challenging to treat the addiction?
Yeah, I think everything that you were just saying, and thank you for having me here as well. There is the e-cigarette coming out has become much more, obviously trending amongst younger people and adults. Obviously, it's been marketed as an alternative for cigarettes to help get off cigarettes, as safer and whatnot. But I think it's become much more of a social event, part of fitting into your crowds. Everyone's using the vapes. It's trending, it's exciting. There's also like rituals of, it is hard to break habits. And if you're exploring cigarettes, vaping, every morning you wake up, you have your cigarette, you have your vape. It's hard to break certain patterns, the rituals of it. And it becomes so ingrained in your social lives and what you're doing at parties and whatnot. So it's hard to combat that. And as adults, obviously, if you want to prevent, your younger people doing it, it's on the adults to recognize their own patterns and to work on their own selves from not vaping in that same way, because it's very hard to break patterns of behavior.
Okay, thank you. All right. Dr. Dweck, what are the immediate and long-term respiratory effects of vaping on adult, including things like COPD, asthma, that we all hear about cigarettes? What's the effects with vaping?
Right, so this is a great question. I like to start by just thinking about what the lung is supposed to be doing and what happens when we expose it to the vape aerosol. So, the job of the lung, if you think about it, is to take whatever's in the room, bring it down into the body, close to the blood, so that the oxygen can easily get in and the carbon dioxide can get out. But there might be toxic stuff in the air, right? And that happens in nature. Do you guys remember back in June there was the wildfires from Canada and the whole city turned orange, right? So you need a defense mechanism. So the lung has defense mechanisms. One of them is that it can narrow the caliber of the bronchial tubes to restrict air from going in. Another is that it can swell or create mucus to trap harmful particles. And that can be a healthy response, as it would have been back in June. Vaping essentially activates these defense mechanisms of the lung. It irritates the lung. It makes the lung think that something unhealthy is being introduced into the lung. And you essentially can recreate disease states like asthma and COPD. And you'll get cough, you'll get mucus. It may affect your eyes, your ears, and sinuses as well. Now, sometimes the tobacco companies, the vaping companies are clever about it, and they may try to hide this by using nicotine salts or other flavorings. But that's what your lung is experiencing. Now, if you've got lung disease to begin with, you've got asthma or COPD to begin with, and you're predisposed to this, you're only going to make it worse.
All right, okay. And over the long term, do we have evidence that this causes COPD?
This is also an important question, and the truth is, we don't know yet. It took decades to truly understand what cigarette smoking was doing to the body. Right now, tobacco's been around forever, but it really became industrialized and commercialized after World War II, and it took a few decades after that to truly understand what tobacco cigarettes were doing. We're about 10 years in to the vaping epidemic, so we don't actually know for sure. But again, what we do know is that what we can see so far is that it's not good. Particularly its efficiency in delivering nicotine and getting people physically addicted.
Okay. And despite vaping being a better alternative than cigarettes, what are the harmful substances in the pods that are with it?
So It's hard to, so I'll use an example. You guys may remember, you may not, but before the pandemic in 2019, summer of 2019, do you remember there were a ton of news stories of kids ending up in the ICU with terrible lung disease, something we call EVAL, electronic cigarette or vaping associated lung injury, on ventilators. Why? Because at the time we didn't know, but it was something in the vaping liquid. We think now maybe it was vitamin E, but the truth is, we don't really know what happens when you light this stuff, when you heat this stuff up and transform the chemicals. The devices themselves have been known to explode, but we know that the aerosol is not water. This is a common misconception that I'm vaping, I'm getting a little nicotine or whatever else I'm putting in there, and it's really just water. It's not water at all. There are toxic substances, there are heavy metals, there are microparticulates that make it down into the lung and can get stuck there and may cause long-term damage.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and just from my end, just to add, obviously the most common substances that you'll hear people vaping or experience is going to be nicotine, which is something that we've been talking about, and then obviously marijuana has become very part of that vaping culture nowadays, especially the last few years, I would say. It's been hiking up. In general, just the pod, like Dr. Dweck said earlier, it is a much stronger content inside each pod. So whether it's nicotine or marijuana or even CBD, which is what you see in like all these convenience stores, you can vape anything. It's just the fact that you're getting so much more, so much faster. So whether it's marijuana, you have the effects of that high, the THC concentration is extremely high in this pod form. So any effects you're getting from smoking marijuana, you're getting from vaping as well. And the same with nicotine. So is it safer, is it not? Long term, obviously hard to tell. In the short term, it's just a very, very quick system to get these substances.
So the marijuana that we're using in the pods today are not the same as the marijuana, our grandparents or parents used to use years ago.
I would say, and I say this all the time, the marijuana that was smoked way back when, not even way back when, I would say even like 20, 30 years ago, it was, let's say, 1% THC. The marijuana that people are smoking nowadays could be up to like 70, 80%. So it's really not straight THC. It's not straight like healthy stuff like used to be considered natural and it's part of the earth and the way that people try to frame it. But now it's just become much stronger and you never know what's really mixed into it, and it doesn't have the high that kids are feeling nowadays is very different than the high that our parents and grandparents experienced.
All right, so that the addiction is stronger.
The addiction is going to naturally, there's more likelihood for addiction. A lot of people always say that you can't get addicted to marijuana. That's a very common thing you hear. You could definitely develop dependency towards it. You can develop psychological dependence or addictive behaviors towards it. There's withdrawal symptoms if you stop using nicotine and marijuana, but the marijuana is something that we're seeing so much now in our younger generation that it's worth noting that, it's definitely something you can get strongly dependent on.
Thank you. Dr. Dweck, might as well let's focus in a little bit. We've been talking about nicotine and marijuana. What does nicotine do to the body? What effect does it have on the body?
So nicotine is a real drug. It's actually highly physically addictive. It's up there with opioids, benzodiazepines in terms of the ease with which you develop physical dependence. There are nicotine receptors throughout the body that are mostly found in the brain and the central nervous system and also in the muscles. And it's a very potent stimulant. And it will sort of amp up the body a little bit, make you a little hyper-reactive. And it also will raise the blood pressure, raise the pulse. It can increase the amount of work that the heart needs to do and contribute to long-term cardiovascular disease separate from the toxins that are in cigarette smoke. So switching from a cigarette to a vape cartridge may have some benefits, but you're not getting away scot-free. You're still creating a physical dependency and harming your body.
Okay, and let's compare what nicotine does to the body to what marijuana does to the body.
So, when we talk about marijuana, we're really talking about probably dozens of different chemical compounds. The majority of which is either THC or CBD. Does anyone want to volunteer from the audience or on Instagram to tell me what marijuana does to the body? Nobody wants to raise their hand? No? Okay. All right. So, CBD is thought to be to help with anxiety and to be less intoxicating than THC. But THC is a very, very potent intoxicant, and depending on the dose and how you react to it, it can also have some paradoxical effects in terms of stimulation. But there are issues with cognition, nausea and dizziness and things like that, and habitual use in particular can be very problematic. I think with both of these drugs, it's important, though, to also make a distinction between adolescents, young people whose brains and nervous systems are still developing, and an older person who may be hooked on cigarettes and seeking a way off, and I can talk more about that later. But the real issue is in the developing mind, neither nicotine nor THC is a good idea. You're setting yourself up for lasting long-term effects and dependency, which is a little bit different than an adult trying to dabble in it for one reason or another.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that from your experience? What marijuana does to the development of the mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, both of them have effects on someone, the brain stops developing, and you probably know this better than I do, but like well into the 20s, mid-20s area. So anyone who's an adolescent, we'll speak on that before adults, it can affect their cognition, it's impairing their functioning, it can lead to further issues like mental health issues, anxiety, depression. Long-term use can even lead to sometimes psychosis-type symptoms. But yeah, it could really, I think that anxiety being something that's so, normalized nowadays, we all experience some type of anxiety. A lot of people use marijuana thinking that it's helping with your anxiety, but it can also increase your anxiety because of the nature of what it is. And so it ends up being this cycle that an adolescent whose brain's not even developed fully yet, doesn't really recognize these things, they kind of get caught in that cycle, and they don't really know how to make these healthier decisions. They don't know it just impairs their functioning all around, and that could lead into long-term issues with their cognitive functioning.
Thank you so much. I want to, focus a little bit on, and this is a question for both of you, if you can. The vapes were marketed as a way for people to cut down on cigarettes and get off their cigarettes. And I don't know if we're actually seeing that, or we're seeing more people addicted to something else. How does the marketing of this affect the people who are getting addicted or getting hooked, both adults and kids?
I can start to. I'll tell you that the marketing is way ahead of the science on this. There are multiple aspects to quitting smoking or marijuana use. There's the physical addiction. There's the ritual and the habit that can be difficult to break. But in terms of physical addiction, there are plenty of FDA-approved nicotine replacements out there on the market. You can get them for free. 1-800-NY-QUITS. You get some for free. They're not hard to come by. So if you need a nicotine replacement, I would go with what's FDA-approved, what's out there, what's free. Now, is it true that these nicotine vape products can help people quit. So there is more scientific literature that supports that, but with some serious trade-offs. So if you take a group of people and you give, so this actually was just done, this was published in New England Journal last week. They did this in Switzerland. So they took a group of smokers, they gave them vouchers for cash. They said you can use it on nicotine replacement or whatever you want. And then the other half, they gave them nicotine vape products. So more people who got the nicotine vapes did ultimately stop smoking. But in the group that got the vouchers, if you were successful at stopping smoking, you got rid of nicotine altogether. If you switched to the vape, you're basically stuck on the vape. And again, we don't know the long-term, we don't really know the long-term health effects of it. But as I said, it doesn't look good. You're still addicted to nicotine and whatever the products are in the aerosol. Why is it good? Well, because cigarettes are so terrible that this might be a better option for an adult, but there are better options out there. So the marketing has definitely, in my opinion, gotten ahead of the science, because if you really want to quit, there are better ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of, there was also a documentary that came out recently about the whole Juul issue. But I think the marketing, I agree, it's definitely well beyond where the science is. If you ever notice advertisements, firstly, you could see advertisements on billboards for Juuls and whatnot. You don't really see that for cigarettes as much anymore, or at all. But you always see it with, like, you know, part of a lifestyle, the excitement. It's like a trendy way to relax at the end of the day. There might be a celebrity endorsing it, right? So it's very appealing to especially the younger populations, and also the flavors of these, specifically the nicotine ones, because the marijuana ones I don't believe are flavored. But the nicotine ones, obviously Juuls have been banned for the flavors, but there's a billion other brands out there, and there's a bunch of exciting options for young people to want to explore. It doesn't have that same, like, menthol taste to it. So it's definitely something that brings in young people, especially if their friends are all doing it. It looks cool. It doesn't have that same smell. And that marketing has really been very powerful to get people. I mean, they did a very good job getting people
I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
Because the companies that make this stuff, they know that what we're telling you is true, which is why they're trying to hook teenagers and people in their early 20s, because they're going to have customers for life.
Yeah.
And I'm a pulmonologist, so fine with me, because then I'll have customers for life. You know, but that's not really why I'm here. So I think this is a very important point. You know, it's if you're an adult and you're stuck on cigarettes and vaping is the best you could do, I mean, I think you can do better. That's one category of risk. But what's happening with our kids is a whole other thing. They don't need to be addicted or exposed to anything like this. They don't need to become customers for life. They don't need to be addicted at an early age. You know, if I started smoking, I probably wouldn't get that addicted and be easy for me to quit. Okay, I'm over 25. So, if you couldn't tell. But for kids, the opposite is true. You know, where they are physiologically and mentally, they're very likely to get stuck on it. And then when they are my age, they're still going to be stuck on it and won't be able to quit. And that's the truth. And the companies know that.
Yeah.
And they target their ads accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that it's harder to want to quit when you're seeing all around you that it's cool and it's natural and good for you, and like the CBD world, like all these things are the clever signs that they use, and they make it, it's better than cigarettes, so it must be good, you know. They know exactly what they're doing. And I do think that there's a lot of cigarette smokers that have been successful at stopping smoking cigarettes, but again, you're not left without nicotine. You're still addicted to something. So it may have helped the cigarette situation, but didn't fully issue.
Thank you so much. I want to highlight something you both said, and, you know, for my next question, you know, you both talked about how vaping is such a powerful delivery system to the bloodstream of whether it be marijuana or nicotine or whatever it is we're vaping, and how much the levels that we're taking in are so different than what we were used to taking in or what people were taking in years ago. Knowing how strong that addiction is because the levels are so much higher, if somebody wanted to get off of vaping, if somebody wanted to move on to the next level of actually not being addicted to nicotine or the marijuana or anything else, both medically and psychologically, what would be your recommendation of how to do
Yeah.
that?
So I think, I'll start. I mean, I actually think that the psychological component here is the harder piece. You know, from a purely medical perspective, you know, we can work on the physical addiction. You know, I mentioned these FDA-approved nicotine replacement products as an example. There are also medications that we use that doctors can prescribe to help curb cravings. So some of them are in the anti-anxiety, antidepressant sort of category that have this effect of curbing cravings. So that's, you know, that is a tool. You know, there are some other tools that can help with cravings. Naloxone, believe it or not, even though that's not exactly its intended use. So the medical aspect in terms of dealing with the physical addiction and curbing some of the cravings, we do have some tools. But the psychology of it is incredibly powerful, and that's where most people get tripped up. You know, as Jessica was saying, they develop rituals that are important to them. You know, they need a break during the day. They need to go step outside. They've incorporated this into their daily routine of stress relief or whatever it is, or it's an incredibly social, serves an incredibly social function, and you don't want to miss out. And so the psychology of it, I find, at least in my practice, is much more difficult to deal with than the physical medical aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I think that it's, if someone's open to getting off of any of these substances, I think the first step is obviously asking for support in doing so. I know a lot of parents and friends think that scaring our kids into knowing all the risk and, oh my God, did you see what happened to that one? Who's like, that doesn't work. Our kids are not really interested in the scare tactics. They're more about what I can get now. I also think it's also important for us to recognize that we do live in a very immediate gratification world, and they're now addicted to something that is very immediately gratifying, and just to tell them risks about it, it's really not going to help. I think that helping people develop skills on delaying gratification, which is a huge project in and of itself, but learning different ways of coping with their life stressors, finding different ways of socializing with peers. And again, this is not an easy, just do this and it'll work, but it's about setting up healthier patterns and being a little bit behavioral about it and changing the thoughts around it as well. But I think that if someone's open to quitting, to do it on their own might be hard because of the psychology behind it. And it's never easy to just quit something and just be done. So, but yeah, I think that that's definitely harder than the physical piece because that's long lasting.
I want to make another a point also just to the parents in particular. This is also not one of those do as I say but not as I do situations. You know, when we're trying to get people to quit cigarettes, everybody in the house has to quit. Mm-hmm. The husband, the wife, you know, the mom, the dad, the aunts, everybody's got to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's not one of these things where you tell your kid, well, you can't do it, but they know that you're doing it. Right. The whole household's got to do it together.
Right, because that just makes it more oh, it's okay to do, just not for me. And that's something that the kids nowadays are, I think, a little savvier than we were as kids. So they're not really one to just be okay with you doing it and not them. But yeah, I always say if you need help getting off of anything, whether weed, nicotine, you can always come to us at SAFE. We can help you with that, and develop healthier skills to, fit in and deal with your life stressors. But it's definitely something to be mindful that it's a parenting conversation with your kids, not just this big, scary meeting about I caught you with the vape. It has to be a little bit more thoughtful than that.
All right, thank you so much. I do want to point out also that I think a piece of this is nowadays cigarettes are taboo, right? You can't smoke anywhere, there's no smoking sections. The vape allows people access in most situations.
That were once gotten by a joint or a cigarette. I mean, both of those things, you come home smelling like this product, and that itself is a reason why a lot of kids wouldn't have even tried that in a lot of the worlds. Like, they don't want to go into their classroom smelling like cigarette smoke. But this is a very quick, and no one even notices. It's usually doesn't make any noise. It has no smell. They don't look different. Your eyes don't really get so red with it, right? Like, there's a lot of things that you can get away with these systems. So it does make it much harder than.
Yeah, people should also understand that this is very intentional in that they're being marketed to. The way that, if you're in fashion and design, you're going to try to market. So these devices are intentionally designed to be discreet, to be cool, to be customizable, you can do a mod, you can have this part of the marketing, and it's very intentional. And I would argue that there are other ways of expressing yourself. Getting hooked on one of these products and having a super cool, vape device is not the way to express your individuality. There are other ways of doing that. You're being marketed to, and it's part of it's very intentional.
Okay, thank you. At this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up to the audience if anybody wants to ask a question without going on camera. You don't have to, we won't have the cameras turn around, so you don't have to go on camera, but if anybody would like to ask a question, going once? Going twice?
Any questions online?
Okay.
Waiting to see if anybody else. If you both mentioned that if the nicotine is much stronger in the vaping, and you said that you would see it from the eyes, you wouldn't see it externally in any other way than vaping, if so much more chemical or nicotine is going into the body.
Well, I
Yep.
was referring more to the marijuana with
Yeah.
the eyes being red. But,
So
yeah.
a lot of that actually is a function of the smoke itself and the substances that are in the smoke, and we know that the cigarette smoke can be very irritating and very toxic. As far as the marijuana is also an interesting one because if you were to smoke you're burning the marijuana leaf or whatever, or the bud, whatever. You're going to get a mix of a lot of the different cannabinoids that are in there, dozens of them. What is typically put in these vape cartridges is something a little more pure, so you're getting sort of more distilled THC or maybe a little bit of CBD, and you're not getting the whole mix. So you may be getting not quite the same reaction that you might be used to. I didn't mean it that way, but.
Somebody asked, what should parents do if kids don't want help?
It's always the hardest thing to answer. I wish, I've been with SAFE for a very long time, I wish there was one sentence I could tell all parents about what to do to get your kid help or to get your kid to want help. The reality is, I think it's just having open conversation with your kid. If they don't want help, like, eventually maybe they will. I think that some of it goes on to the parent to do your own exploration and how you can make changes, who knows, but it's having conversation with your kid about what is it doing for them, understand their perspective, rather than coming at it from like a parental disciplinarian, like you have to do this or else. I think it's just having those conversations, see what it's doing for them and see why they're, like what's making it so important to them.
Jessica, if I can, I just want to add to what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that the dialogue is the most important thing with the parenting. I think even children can be educated and make an educated choice, so they can understand what they're doing. It doesn't mean that they're going to stop, but it may mean sooner than later that they would make that decision to make a change. So giving them the education and making it an open dialogue rather than something that's a power struggle. I think that's great. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Eitan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me end by starting where I started. Thank you very much to Jessica, Dr. Dweck, and Shlomo for moderating this evening. This was a great topic, and great information that you shared. Just a little bit for our audience, if you need addiction help, please reach out to SAFE. The number for SAFE is 718-GET-SAFE. If you need a medical referral, if something on the medical side, please reach out via phone or text. Our number is 718-787-0077. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us online, in person, and have a wonderful evening.